Hello, everyone. This is Mike from the On the Stack podcast at iceworm.org/magic. Back with another deck video. This is a Tiny Leaders deck. I've talked about this deck in the past, but I've made a few changes to it. So I'm just going to run down the deck and tell you how the deck works and what cards are in it. So first of all, we have our commander, who is Alesha, who smiles at death. She costs 2 colorless, 1 red. She is a 3/2, has first strike, and whenever she attacks, you can pay a hybrid cost of either of black or white. You can pay 2. If you do, you return target creature with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Into our lands, I have 1 Bloodfell Caves. Just comes into play tapped. You gain a life. Taps for black or red. I have 1 Evolving Wilds. So you tap this, sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land, put it into play tapped, and then shuffle your library. I have 12 mountains. We have 1 plains. I have 1 Scoured Barrens. Comes into play tapped. You gain a life when it comes into play, and it taps for white or black. I have 1 swamp. I have 1 Terramorphic Expanse. So you tap this, sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land, put that land into play tapped, and then shuffle your library. I have 1 Unstable Frontier. It taps for colorless, or I can also tap it to turn another basic land I have into a different kind of basic land. So if I have a bunch of mountains and I need a swamp, I can tap this and turn one of those mountains into a swamp or a plains or any other kind of land I need. And finally, in lands, I have 1 Windscarred Crag. Comes into play tapped. You gain a life when it comes in, and you can either tap it for red or white. We move into our artifacts. Just have 1 artifact. I have 1 Altar of the Brood. Costs 1 colorless. And whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under my control, each opponent puts a top card of their library into their graveyard. So whenever I play a land, whenever I play a creature, or any other permanent like artifacts or enchantments, everybody puts a card from their library into their graveyard. We're going to move into our creatures. I have 1 Altak Bloodseeker, and whenever a creature an opponent control dies, he gets +2/+0 and gains first strike and haste until the end of turn. He costs 1 colorless, 1 red, and is a 2/1. We have 1 Eidolon of the Great Revel, costs 2 red, is a 2/2 enchantment creature, and whenever a player casts a spell with converted mana cost 3 or less, it deals 2 damage to that player. And the thing about Tiny Leaders is all spells in this format are 3 mana or less. So this is going to go off for basically every spell that gets played. And I have ways to protect myself from taking this 2 damage. We'll get to that in a little bit. I have 1 Foundry Street Denizen, costs 1 red for a 1/1, and whenever another red creature enters the battlefield under my control, he gets +1/+0 until the end of turn. I have 1 Goblin Rabblemaster, costs 2 colorless, 1 red. He's a 2/2. He forces other goblin creatures that you control to attack each turn if possible. At the beginning of combat, I can put you put a 1/1 red goblin token onto the battlefield with haste, and also when Goblin Rabblemaster attacks, it gets +1/+0 until the end of turn for each goblin attacking with him. I have 1 Kolgahan Forerunners, costs 2 colorless, 1 red, and it can also be dashed for the same cost. It has a toughness of 3, and its power is dependent on how many creatures you control. So if you have 5 creatures, it comes in as a 5/3, and it also has trample. I have 1 Mardu Scout, costs 2 red, is a 3/1, can also be dashed for colorless and red. We have 1 Monastery Swiftspear, costs 1 red for a 1/2. It has haste, and it also has prowess, so whenever I cast a non-creature spell, I can put a 1/1 counter on until the end of turn. This gets a bonus until the end of turn on that. I have 1 Mud Button Torch Runner, costs 2 colorless, 1 red, so 1/1, and when it dies, it deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Going to move into our enchantments. I have 1 Barrage of Expendables, just cost 1 red. I can pay red, sacrifice a creature, and it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. I can do this if I do this with non-token creatures. I can then bring them back to play using Alesha's ability if it's a creature that has power 2 or less. Have 1 Circle of Flame for 1 colorless, 1 red. Whenever creatures without flying attack me or a planeswalker I control, it deals 1 damage to that creature. We have 1 Circle of Protection red, costs 1 colorless, 1 white, and I can play colorless. And the next time a red source of my choice would deal damage to me, I can prevent that damage. So I will obviously use this on stuff like Eidolon on the Great Revel to prevent that 2 damage from hitting me. We have 1 Goblin slide, costs 2 colorless, 1 red. Whenever I cast a non-creature spell, I can pay 1. If I do, I can put a 1/1 red Goblin token creature with haste onto the battlefield. We have 1 Impact Tremors, which costs 1 colorless, 1 red. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, this deals 1 damage to each opponent. So when stuff comes back using Alesha's ability, this triggers when Goblin Rabblemaster brings in the 1/1 Goblin token. That triggers, things like that. We have 1 Mardu Ascendancy, costs red, white, and black. And whenever a non-token creature attacks, I can put a 1/1 red Goblin token onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. I can also sacrifice this enchantment and give my creatures +0/+3 until the end of turn. I have 1 Raid Bombardment, costs 2 colorless, 1 red. Whenever a creature I control with power 2 or less attacks, Raid Bombardment deals 1 damage to the defending player. So if I attack with 3 1/1 goblins, he takes 3 damage regardless. He can block the goblins if he wants, but he's still going to take damage based on how many creatures you have that have power 2 or less that are attacking. Into the instance, I have 1 Enlightened Tutor. This costs 1 white. Search my library for an artifact or enchantment. Reveal that card to all players. Shuffle my library and put that card on top of it. I have 1 Lightning Bolt, just to deal 3 damage to target creature or player. We have 1 Magma Spray for 1 red. Deals 2 damage to target creature. If that creature would be put into a graveyard this turn, it gets removed from the game. So basically it just gets exiled instead. We have 1 Searing Blood for 2 red. Deals 2 damage to target creature. And when that creature dies this turn, Searing Blood deals 3 damage to the creature's controller. So if you use this on something that has toughness 2 or less, it kills that creature, and then whoever controlled that creature also takes 3 damage on top of it. We have 1 Shock, deals 2 damage to target creature or player, just costs 1 red. Into our sorceries, I have 1 Arc Lightning, costs 2 colorless, 1 red, and it deals 3 damage divided as I choose among any number of target creatures or players. We have 1 Bathe in Dragonfire, deals 4 damage to target creature. I have 1 Dragon Fodder, costs 1 colorless, 1 red, and I put 2 1/1 red goblins into play. I have 1 Flame Rift, costs 1 red, it deals 4 damage to each player, and again I can prevent that with Circle of Protection. I have 1 Goblin Grenade, and an additional cost to cast it, you have to sacrifice a goblin, and it deals 5 damage to target creature or player. If I use this with something like the Mud Button Torch Runner, it deals 5 damage from the sorcery, and then Mud Button Torch Runner's ability also resolves when it gets put into a graveyard. It deals 3 damage on top of it. So if you use that with this combo, you can do 8 damage. We have 1 Hordling Outburst, costs 1 colorless, 2 red, and I can put 3 1/1 red goblin tokens onto the battlefield. And again, if Alter the Brood is out, they mill 3, and if Impact Tremors is out, they take 3 damage from creatures entering the battlefield. And finally, we have 1 Scouring Sands. Deals 1 damage to each creature you don't control. And you can also scry 1, so you can look at the top card of your library. If you like it, you can leave it there. If you don't like it, you can put it on the bottom of your library. So basically, the stars of this deck are Alesha and her ability to bring creatures back into play, Alter the Brood to mill people. We also then have, Impact Tremors, so whenever a creature enters the battlefield under my control, it deals damage to everybody. And then Raid Bombardment, so whenever I attack with creature's power 2 or less, the defending player takes damage. And then we have, like as you saw, a bunch of spells to generate goblin tokens and things like that. So we have the Goblin Rabblemaster, we have Mardu Ascendancy, a couple of these other spells that generate tokens. We have Goblin Slide. A lot of ways to get creatures into play and do a lot of damage through Impact Tremors and Raid Bombardment. If you like this video, rate, comment, subscribe. Let me know in the comments if there's cards you would add to this deck or cards you would remove. I'm interested to see what you had to say about this. So I want to thank you all for watching and take care.